Today we're going to take a look at how important drawing is in our painting. And we'll be looking at the artwork of Jean Leon Jerome and his art students. Jean Leon Jerome was born in 1824 and died in 1904. He was a French painter and sculptor, and his career was probably at the height of the neoclassical style of painting, which involved painting Greek mythology, history paintings, large paintings of history and Greek mythology, very figure-oriented. The figure was king to neoclassical painters. That was the height of painting at that time. Landscapes were secondary. Still life wasn't even much considered, at least according to neoclassical painters of that time. And very much academic in their approach to the figure. Drawing was really important. Here's one of Jerome's painting, a large painting of Roman gladiator stuff going on. Very dramatic. His compositions were really good, but the drawing is very detailed. Everything's about outline, showing all the form and shape and detail in everything. And things are outlined instead of seen in terms of mass. So nowadays, to paint this group of figures up here, we might go ahead and block in a shape or mass that best represents the shape or group of figures, and then using dark and light shapes start to break it up and gradually get smaller. In the neoclassical style, more about drawing, outlining the figures, filling in the darks and the lights. Not to say that that was wrong compared to how we see form now, but it's just different. Very detail-oriented. But he did handle the detail really well. And for as much detail as he used, he always had, I think, a really nice sense of light. There was always a sense of space and light, as well as drawing with a lot of detail. So there was no suggestion of detail somewhere. Everything was pretty explicit, detailed everywhere. Whereas today we might focus on this figure, have the most detail there, then as we spread out, things get more and more suggested, but not so with Jerome. You can look in the background. Each figure is individually painted. But very strong composition, very striking paintings. Also did a lot of portraits, but drawing very, very accurate. Almost kind of a photograph for the time, but composition very important. Painted a lot from Middle East, India, traveled there a lot and did a lot of paintings from there. And you can see the detail is everywhere. Nothing is suggested, but very well painted. Some softer edges, the figure that's going into the shadows. But other than that, not a great discernment of hard and soft edges unless things are receding and going back. But the drawing is really good. And all his students were known for the drawing. This is a painting that's at the Metropolitan in New York. I see this one every time I go there. Really well done. Beautiful color. For as tight a painter as he was, his color was really nice. It's a great, great portrait. But the scenes are always interesting. A lot of Middle Eastern or Oriental architecture, very nicely done. But I have a lot of work by his students, so I'm going to kind of go through these. Again, the sense of light is always there in the drawing, very accurate, and always detail. Now, this is a student of his, Edwin Lord Weeks, born in 1849, died in 1903. He's from Boston, Massachusetts, so he was an American, moved to Paris, went to school there, but traveled a lot to the Middle East, to the Orient. Let's get the whole painting there. There we go. Now, you can see with Edwin's paintings, they're a lot looser. He has areas of suggestion, like the tree. The figures here are just suggested. This might be a study, maybe not a finished painting, I'm not sure. A lot of detail in the building, but not so much everywhere else. I mean, the stones here are all pretty much painted, but as they go back, the edges are softened until they disappear. So using suggestion and softer edges to create a bit more depth and atmosphere. But the drawing is there. Drawing on the figure, while it's a bit more suggested, very, very accurate. A really nice sense of values. Here's another one. Again, the foreground, the steps, kind of suggested, figures suggested. Might be a study for a larger painting, but he does suggest more. Good sense of light, a little bit of atmosphere from using warm and cool temperatures, a little cooler in the shadows. The shadows aren't as dark and heavy. There's reflected light in them. Probably learning that a little bit from the Impressionists, but I'm sure Jerome wanted nothing to do with Impressionism. But some of his students, I think, did pick up some things from that. Same thing here, a lot more suggested, especially in the water. Water has some real nice brushwork. But we can zoom in here at the boat and the water. Things are just suggested a bit more. Not quite so literal. Still a lot going on in the painting, but not as detailed and not as line oriented as Jerome, a bit more shape oriented, but also very nice color. Nice brushwork down here in the water and on the steps. Very loose and cooler shadows, more muted violets and muted light oranges to suggest sunlight and shadow. But as always, the drawing is really nice. Probably a quick color study. I don't know how quick it is, but a color study, maybe outside. Hard to know where you'd start with a subject like that. My guess is starting with the big darks of inside the building, getting that dark shape with the shape of the lights. Here he's working more with shape instead of quite so much outline. Seeing the figures in terms of masses with spots or dots or shape of color instead of outline, especially in a study like this because you don't have time for any outline. Now this is Frank Myers Boggs, another American painter. In fact, I think all these are that we're looking at. He was from Springfield, Oregon, and made his way to France where he studied with Jerome. And he dropped the figure and went into landscape. Probably a big disappointment to Leon Jerome, but he was very good. Drawing is still very important with the shapes, getting the right proportions. Brushwork, a lot looser, probably very much influenced by French Impressionists or some of the early landscape painters in France and England. Very, very loose. So nearly an Impressionist, Frank. His color, not so much. His color was pre-Impressionism, more Corot and Constable than Impressionistic. But the brushwork, nice and loose. Great atmosphere, the values getting lighter, cooler as they recede, which is also part of drawing, especially if you're a landscape painter, getting the proportions, getting the value changes right to show depth and atmosphere. That's what drawing is in landscape painting. Not so much outlining. You don't have much use for outline drawing, but it's seeing shapes in terms of dark and light and getting the proportions right to make the drawing work. Again, very loose, little Pissarro-like. Probably ran into a few of Pissarro's paintings. He was born in 1855 and died in 1926, so he was influenced probably quite a bit by the Impressionists, but did study with Jerome as well. But very, very loose. Not a really finished area anywhere, but as a whole, the painting works really nicely. Nice broken values and colors here in the foreground and in the sky. He did a lot of small paintings, probably outside for studies. This one's in oil. Again, very suggested, and you're going to see more mass and shape than you are outline working like that. A lot of atmosphere here, sails and boats gradually getting lighter and softer edge as they go back. He also did a lot of watercolor with graphite or charcoal, maybe even crayon, but would do the drawing in charcoal, crayon, and then lay on top a little bit of watercolor to add kind of an accent of color, which is a nice way to do sketches outside. See color as an accent and use the pencil to get the values and drawing right. Here's another one, more value in shape oriented than it is outline oriented. Now you get outlines, of course, when you get to the lines on the ships and the ropes, but it's more about shape, the dark, light shape of the water against the dark shape of the ships and the ground, and the light shape of the sky. It's another sketch. Again, some kind of crayon, maybe charcoal, with a little bit of warm and cool watercolor, maybe blue and burnt sienna to show some depth and shadow. Maybe a little bit of black also, although some of the black watercolor. But a lot of the black is the crayon or charcoal and then painting on top of it. But even though they're probably studies for a finished painting, they're just nice in themselves. Here's another one. Looks more like graphite with a little watercolor on top. Again, looks like charcoal with watercolor on top. Nice composition. So learning how to draw and compose from Jerome really helps with your landscape. Now here we're looking at Eugene Guéradet. He was from Switzerland and came to Paris and studied with Jerome, 1853 to 1907. But also followed Jerome out east to the Middle East and India. This image isn't quite as big, but he's also influenced by Impressionism, not so much in the brushwork, in the drawing, but in the suggestion of light, keeping the shadows very light and with more saturated color and using more color temperature, warm lights here and a lot cooler in the shadows. But again, the drawing is really nice. A lot of detail, but the detail is more focused here and less as it goes back. This image is not a big file, so it doesn't work as well as I thought it would. This one's better. You can see a lot more of what he's thinking, color and value wise. Seeing the drawing more in terms of shape than outline. Again, seeing a big overall shape of the figures, which when they're just draped like that, it's a lot easier. And then breaking that shape up into dark and light and maybe a halftone and using edges to make the form work a little better. Great suggestion of light here. A lot of nice, cool, slightly muted violets and some not so muted. Great atmosphere as it goes back. It's lighter and cooler and the kind of glare of the sunlight on the sand, really light yellow, orange. Great atmosphere here. All I think from the standpoint of knowing how to draw really well. You think, well, I'm just doing landscape. What does drawing have to do with anything? But again, it's seeing this mountain in terms of dark and light shapes, and getting the proportions right, and then the values right, and then the color temperature right. And that is drawing in landscapes. But here, very much just suggested. None of the strong detail from Jerome. Probably more of a color study than a finished painting, but it looks finished to me. This is probably more of his finished work. And not a big file, so we can't see as much, but more detailed, but just detailed more in one area, and then things get more simple as they recede. A nice atmosphere and use of, again, warm and cool color to suggest the light. It's a really nice one here. Brushwork's a lot looser. Things are more suggested. Bigger shapes of dark and light and not so much detail like Jerome. Although, this back screen here is very much detailed as well as the architecture. But the focus is more on the light than on outline and detail. But the sense of light is really, really there. And using temperature really makes that a lot more evident. Last one here from Eugene Guéradet. A strong sense of light here on the building, everything in the shadow. Brushwork's a lot looser. Things a bit more suggested, but still fairly tight. But these guys could really draw. And drawing in terms of shape instead of outline, you're able to get the right relationship between the darks, the light. And having a certain number of values in the shadow, certain number of values in the light. Not just trying to paint everything you see, but limiting your values to 3 to 4 within the shadow and 2 to 3 in the light. Otherwise, you are just copying everything you see. So keeping your values more limited and trying to see things more in terms of shape. Another one was George Bridgman. I found one painting of his that was not in good shape. It wasn't a very good image of it. But he's known more as a teacher anyway, from the Art Students League in New York. He was born in 1864. I think died in 1945, but studied in Paris under Jerome and then came back and was really known as a figure drawing teacher at the Art Students League. And there are still a lot of books by him that are out, several. They're reprints, and you can find them in the Dover book publication. Dover republishes a lot of older art books, and they're fairly inexpensive. They're paperback, really good. He kind of initiated the idea of seeing the figure. There's some studies of arms here. Knows the anatomy really well, how to break it apart. But he kind of initiated that idea of seeing the figure in terms of blocks. You know, the head is a square, the torso, making things more geometrical, more solid. You can break it down and understand the figure better that way. And he was really influential to a lot of artists, especially illustrators like Norman Rockwell, Dean Cornwell studied under him. Then there was Frederick Arthur Bridgman, not related to George, but also painted out in the Middle East, in the Orient with Jerome. Now, he's from Alabama and found his way to Paris and studied with Jerome. Again, not so much detail, a little bit looser on the brushwork than Jerome, but not quite impressionistic either. Although a lot of his paintings are more impressionistic, like this one here. Not a big file that we can see it really well, but you can see it's more shape oriented, more towards color and value than detail, but still very, very detailed. Now his pictures of the Orient, a bit more towards Jerome style, but still softer edged, things more suggested, brushstroke a bit looser, really nice use of light, which all those guys did really well, was suggest the light. One light source illuminating everything in the interiors. And here's another one here. And a lot looser with the brushwork, still a lot of detail, but the detail is limited to the figures and maybe a few things in there. But the surrounding room, the door back in here, the wall, the foreground, a lot looser and more suggestive, a lot more painterly. And he had a lot more students that are worth looking at, but he had a lot of influence on a lot of painters.